Okay, so something we need to briefly touch on while we're at the market structure of an oligopoly is game theory. Game theory is about how different players will act in a given situation where each player is rational and the action of one player have implications for the outcome for the other players. And the situation I just described should sound familiar to us because it is describing the kind of interdependence we have between firms in an oligopoly, which is why it can be very useful to analyze decision making in an oligopoly using game theory. Now, one thing I want to make very clear is that there is a lot more to game theory than we touch on in IB. And based on my personal experience, we need to know very little of game theory to get through the course itself. So whatever I mentioned in this video, I want you to think of it as not what game theory is, but rather that this is the content related to game theory that we need to know for the IB syllabus. So starting off with a very famous example in game theory, the prisoner's dilemma. So here's the situation. There are two people, A and B, that are suspected of having committed a crime. Now, the police take them into separate rooms so that neither A nor B knows what the other person is doing. And police are interrogating them in each room and make them an offer, prompting them to confess to their crime and giving each person an incentive to rat out on the other person using differences in prison sentence. We can use a payoff matrix to map out the possible outcomes in this situation. First off, we have two players in the scenario, person A and person B, and each person has two possible options as to what they can do. They can either confess or stay quiet. If both people choose to stay quiet, the police won't get the critical evidence to put them away for a serious crime, and both go to prison for a year each. You can use the colors to follow which number represents the outcome for each player. If they both confess to the crime, they're both convicted of the crime and get a 5-year sentence each. Now the situation we need to model is, what if one person A confesses, but B chooses to stay quiet? In this case, A is rewarded for cooperating and walk away free. And B, that not only committed the crime but also did not cooperate, gets a 20-year prison sentence. It would be the same case the other way around if B confesses and A stays quiet. So this would be our full payoff matrix. It shows all the possible outcomes based on the possible actions of each player. And the prisoner's dilemma is, do you confess or stay quiet? Considering the fact that you are in separate rooms and you do not know what the other person will do. Now, putting what they will do aside for a second, if you were to sort of think of what would be the overall best outcome in this situation, it kind of seems like the one right here, where both end up with a small prison sentence of just 1 year, which is much smaller compared to both 5 and 20 years. So it kind of looks like the win-win situation, both staying quiet. Now let's take a look at what will happen. In economics, we assume individuals are rational and self-interested, meaning both A and B will make the decision that is best for themselves without being sure what the other person will do. So back to the matrix. Let's look at this from the perspective of A. A cannot control what B will do, so A has to make the choice that leaves them best off regardless of what B chooses. So first think of the case where B chooses to confess. What should A do? A should also confess because 5 years is better than 20 years. So in the case that B confesses, A should also choose confess. What if B stays quiet? Well, in that case, it is also better for A to confess because 0 years is still better than 1 year. And if you do the same from B's perspective, you'll find that confessing is also the winning strategy for B as well. And we end up here. 5 years for both because both will choose to confess because that's what happens when they both consider what is best for themselves. And we can easily see that this is worse than the 1 year and 1 year outcome we identified earlier. So the prisoner's dilemma in game theory gives us a very interesting situation, where the self-interested choice does not always result in an efficient outcome, where you choose what is best for you, but somehow you end up with a suboptimal outcome. So that is our introduction to game theory, and in the next video, we are going to link what we learned in this video with decision making in oligopoly.